Bob Herbert's op-ed.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to op-ed.tv. It's become almost the conventional wisdom that huge numbers of African American voters and other groups that traditionally vote Democratic refuse to turn out in the elections that gave us Donald Trump and Republican majorities in the Senate and House of Representatives. A lot of people have argued that the unwillingness of these voters to go to the polls in 2016 is the primary reason Hillary Clinton was not elected. A new book puts a big spotlight on that false narrative. It's called One Person, No Vote: How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. The author is Carol Anderson, a professor and chair of African American Studies at Emory University in Atlanta, and she is my guest this week. Carol, welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Well, so what's wrong with that narrative? I mean, turnout in an awful lot of crucial Democratic precincts was in fact down if people had voted in numbers that they've traditionally voted in, Democrats. Hillary Clinton would have been elected. What's the problem?
The problem is, and this is what I found in the analysis right after the November election, is that it was black people didn't show up. But what they missed was that this was the first election, the presidential election in 50 years without the protection of the Voting Rights Act. And without those protections, because of the Supreme Court's 2013 decision, Shelby County v. Holder, states went wild with voter suppression, voter ID, gerrymandering, closing polls, voter roll purges, the whole 9 yards, to target it at African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, the youth, the poor, in order to depress the traditional Democratic demographic that votes for Democrats.
So give us a sense, explain why the Voting Rights Act, it's the Voting Rights Act of 1965, why it's so important, or it was so important up until 2013, I guess, why that remains so important all these decades later.
And it remains so important, and I'm going to contradict Chief Justice John Roberts. Because in his decision in the Shelby County v. Holder case, he said several things. One was that the racism that had prevented African Americans from voting and the racism that had required the Voting Rights Act, in fact, to come into being, that's no longer here in America. We're not racist like that.
Oh, we're past that.
Yeah, we're so past that, according to John Roberts.
Right.
He also said that the Voting Rights Act was basically calcified, that only 17 districts had been bailed out of the protections of the Voting Rights Act. And so it shows that the Voting Rights Act wasn't working. Okay, but two things. What he missed was that racism is alive and well in America. And two, it's clear because when the Voting Rights Act was getting its 2006 reauthorization, they had counted over 700 changes that states and jurisdictions had tried to make that the Department of Justice stopped because they were racially discriminatory. So if the Department of Justice has stopped 700 changes to voting rights laws, it tells you that this thing is just clamping at the bit like this monster in the basement trying to come through the door. And the Supreme Court let that door wide open, and boom, voter suppression took over in more than half of the states in the United States.
Now, the truth is that John Roberts, the current Chief Justice, was the protege of William Rehnquist, former Chief Justice.
Yes.
And both of them have traditionally been hostile to rights for African Americans, haven't they?
Absolutely. I mean, and hostile to the Voting Rights Act. So, and you saw, for instance, Rehnquist started his career in Arizona, and one of the things that he was known for was forming a group that would go into the polls and basically challenge Latino voters on whether they were actually registered to vote there and should be registered to vote there, and basically voter intimidation.
Exactly.
You saw that it was in another case where Rehnquist wrote that the 14th and 15th Amendments, which were the amendments coming out after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment dealing with citizenship and due process, and the 15th Amendment dealing with the right to vote and not being hampered by racial discrimination. And he said the 14th and 15th Amendments are basically African Americans trying to get back at the, slaveholders in the past.
It's so horrible.
I mean, it's just, and there's a sense that Rehnquist and John Roberts share a sense that you are giving people their rights.
Not that you have these rights.
Right.
That they can just, as a gift, hand them to you if they want to.
Exactly. And so when you've got that framework of a gift, then that sneering disregard for the basic democratic right to vote.
Right.
And that is what we saw emanating out of this court.
So you were talking about this rush in many states towards voter suppression. I mean, just to do this, that, and the other thing to keep people from voting. Talk about what this, that, and the other thing, what they are. Give us some examples of the types of activities that fall under the umbrella of voter suppression.
So in Alabama, for instance, Alabama actually passed a voter ID law in 2011, 2 years before the Shelby County v. Holder decision, but didn't bother to send it up to the Department of Justice because they knew it couldn't get through a pre-clearance review because it was so fundamentally racist. But shortly after Shelby County v. Holder, Alabama implemented that law. What it was a voter ID law saying that you had to have certain types of government-issued photo ID. And then they defined what types of ID. In that definition of IDs, they made sure that the kinds of IDs that African Americans had was not the one that was listed.
Oh, that's not what we wanted.
That's not what we meant. Not at all. Not at all. And so, for instance, the driver's license, but over 15% of African Americans in Alabama did not have a driver's license, as opposed to about 4% of whites.
Right.
And then they said, but your public housing ID won't count.
Right.
Because 71% of those who had public housing ID were African American. And for many, as Sherilyn Ifill, who is the head of the NAACP, LDF, right? She said, sometimes for many, that's the only ID that they have.
Exactly.
And then Alabama went and shut down the Department of Motor Vehicles in the Black Belt counties.
Right.
So that when you don't have an ID, but now your ID, the place where you can get an ID is closed. Now, there was massive pressure that got those places open for like 1 day a month.
Right.
But
I mean, it's just so clear. It's so outrageous.
Clear. Yes.
Yeah. So voter ID is, the requirement of voter ID is one form of voter suppression. Give us another.
Another form are voter roll purges. And with voter roll purges, it is knocking people off of the registration rolls.
Yep.
And many times people don't even know they've been knocked off. Now, there are laws about how you have to inform people, what the tripwires are. In many cases, the secretaries of state have ignored those laws and just gone straight for, you haven't voted, I'm going to knock you off.
Right.
What we've seen, for instance, is that in Ohio, 1.2 million of those who have been purged simply for not voting regularly, consistently. But
which is crazy. You don't have to vote in every election.
Exactly. But in Ohio, and so that was a way, because what they know are that minorities and that the youth and people who are poor don't vote regularly.
Right.
And so this is a way where you can stay on this side of the 15th Amendment, but in fact target a key demographic and knock them off.
So they'll insist that this is not racially motivated because it applies to everybody, when in fact it is only done for racist reasons.
Exactly, exactly.
You know. And then the things that where people are eligible to vote, but it's made much more difficult to actually cast that vote.
Yes, and so one of the things that they're really good at, for instance, in two measures. One is early voting. Early voting was designed to deal with the fact that you've got many working class folk, and getting off on a Tuesday
Right.
to go vote means that you're either going to miss some work, or that you're not going to vote, and so you're going to miss the chance to really engage civically in choosing who's going to make decisions, policy decisions about your life. I mean, that's what that means. So what early voting does is it spreads that out so that you have more flexibility into when you're going to vote. So one of the things is that African Americans disproportionately use early voting. And so these states began to cut back on early voting hours and early voting days, particularly
Right.
targeting the days where African Americans were coming out, like on Souls to the Polls, that
Yep.
Sunday right before
Very
the election.
specific days, yeah.
Very specific days. And they started eliminating the number of early voting sites. And so I liken it to going into a grocery store. There are 20 aisles, but only 4 aisles are open. And so the lines are just going all the way down the store. And what that does, we've got the research on that. Long lines really begin to demoralize and depress voter turnout because people feel it's futile.
Right, it discourages people.
Right. In Miami, one of the lines was 7 hours
Oh
long.
my goodness.
I mean, 7 hours long. In Cincinnati, the line went for a quarter of a mile. I mean, this is designed to really depress voter turnout.
In certain areas.
In certain areas.
Right.
In certain areas. So in Indiana, for instance, what Indiana did, Mike Pence, when he was the governor, he signed a law that counties that have over 325,000 residents can only have one early voting site. Other counties with fewer residents can have more.
How is it possible under any circumstances to rationalize a law like that? It's not.
It's not.
It's not.
It's not.
Well, and that takes me to specifically to my next question, because these voter suppression efforts are being conducted more and more. They're being conducted by the Republican Party.
Yes.
Be clear about what they're trying to achieve, and if you can, put it in a little bit of an historical context.
And so what they're trying to achieve, and as I was going through this book and going through the research, and I'm a historian, I went, oh my God, this is the Mississippi Plan of 1890. Because with the Mississippi Plan of 1890, that was the drive to remove African Americans from the ballot box, to remove them from having a say in the government.
Because post-Civil War, during Reconstruction,
Right.
blacks had the right to vote, and they were exercising the right to vote,
Yes.
exercising the right to run and hold office.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so all of that, and it was like, no, we're stopping this.
Right.
But then there's this thing called the 15th Amendment. So how do you stop black people from voting without saying we want black people to not vote?
Right.
And so they came up with all of these devices that went after the kind of societally imposed characteristics of a people, and then made those societally imposed characteristics the litmus test. So you had a poll tax. So you had to pay a tax in order to vote, and it was cumulative. Well, if you have inscribed...
Which I don't think a lot of people realize that people do know somewhat about the poll tax, but they don't realize it was cumulative. So explain that.
Yeah, so what that means is that first the rules were very arcane on when you were supposed to pay this poll tax and where. On the third day of the fourth month in those years divisible by 7 but not by 9, right? And so it's like really confusing.
Right.
And because of poverty and that, sometimes it would take people 10, 20 years to be able. So imagine having to pay 20 years of back poll taxes
Right.
before you can vote. So you begin to think about what that means in terms of the annual family income for a family that is impoverished. And so you use poverty as the litmus test to be able to vote. That's what the poll tax does. It doesn't say we don't want black people to vote.
Right.
It's just we don't want poor people to vote. And if you have a disproportionate number of black people who are poor, boom.
Right.
Yeah.
So you just target black people any which way you can without saying
Exactly.
it's because they're black.
Exactly.
And so why now? Why still in the 21st century is the Republican Party engaged in this Awful stuff, actually.
And I think part of it, I will go back to the Southern strategy of
Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon in 1968. Because after 1964, because the South had been the solid Democratic South.
Right.
But then...
The solid Democratic racist South.
Yeah,
with the Democratic office holders, the segregationists, and yeah.
Right, exactly. And so you had, when Lyndon Johnson, Democrat, signs the Civil Rights Act of 64, and then pushes and signs the Voting Rights Act of 65, the solid Democratic South was like, whoa.
what is our brother doing?
Right, you're supposed to be one of us, right? And so, and the Republicans are seeing an opportunity to, in fact, get a larger region into their fold. And so they start talking about the Southern strategy, but they realize it's Lee Atwater, who was Reagan's Southern strategist, said, you know, in 1954 you could say the N-word.
Yeah.
But by 1968, hurts you, backfires.
Can't do that anymore.
Can't do that anymore.
Openly racist.
Can't be openly racist. He says, so we start talking about economic things and things like taxes and like forced busing and states' rights. And he's like, and all of those things, the whole point is that blacks get hurt worse than whites.
Exactly.
Right? And so that is the template for the Southern strategy. So as the Republicans wooed that white supremacist toxin into their party, that toxin eventually took over. You would see with each subsequent election, it became more and more virulent.
Yeah.
So we would get welfare queens, and then we would get Willie Horton, right? And then we would get Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So the Republicans are doing this because the more virulent that toxin of white supremacy became, the more repugnant the Republicans' policies were to a growing and increasingly diverse America.
Right.
They can't win in a democracy by the votes that are out there based on their policies. And they don't have the internal ability to reform because that toxin is so deeply embedded in their way of being, in their way of doing, in their way of thinking. And so their only then recourse to maintain power is to suppress the vote.
I mean, some of it is like literally right in front of your eyes with the demographic changes, for example, and they you know, that's unstoppable. The Republican Party can't stop those demographic changes,
Right.
so you have to keep these folks from voting.
Exactly.
Keep them out of the voting booth.
And we have, you know, there's a term called a Herenvolk democracy. It was like apartheid South Africa, where you have a minority white group that maintains a lot of the power, and the majority blacks do not have that power. And so you hear this cry, basically what they call for an ethno-nationalist state.
Right.
They haven't quite said it as the party, but you see in the ways that they, you know, with immigration and their anti-immigrant stances, with their faux law and order, where law and order is basically applied to folks of color. You see it in those kinds of policies.
One of the things I find particularly insidious have been, one of the things, is the attack on voter registration. Can you talk about what's going on there and how this can be permitted or is legal?
Yeah, so one of the things that they have done, for instance, states like Texas and Florida have implemented laws about how you can register people to vote. So that, you know, so you take Texas that has these big metropolitan cities that spread out over multiple counties. You can only register somebody in a county if they're from that county. So like the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Right.
You cannot register somebody who's in this county. Even if you're at the mall, right? So setting something up at the mall, if you do, and you have to go through a whole series of classes, and the ability to register folks only lasts for so long, and if you violate any of this, you know, you've got a felony. So it criminalizes registering people to vote.
And then and they've been enforcing these laws. Talk about the way some people have been convicted of felonies and imprisoned.
Right, and so they have particularly, I would say, with in Florida, we saw where they had these laws and they went after and they drove the League of Women Voters out of Florida, and the League of Women Voters had to sue. And the League of Women Voters had been there for 70 years registering people to vote. And
who can imagine criminal behavior among the League of Women Voters?
Right, right. But this is because they know that because of these demographics and because of the demographics that those who are becoming voting age eligible are much more diverse than older Americans. And that diversity, you've got to stop that registration. You've also had in Georgia, where I'm from, you've had organizations that have looked at how do we bring in all of these minority voters who are unregistered. And the moment that they started registering, I mean, they began to have some success. Then you had the Secretary of State going after them criminally, doing these massive investigations and yelling voter fraud, voter fraud,
right.
voter fraud.
Right.
And years of these investigations yielded no voter fraud and yielded no charges, therefore yielded no convictions. But what it was designed to do was to, in fact, stoke fear in these organizations about registering.
And it's been working
to some extent, yes, yes. I mean, it is, and so you're like, okay, we got an I dot and T cross, and they get hung up in a catch-22 because the law says that every card that gets turned in for a registered, you've got to turn it in. Every card that's completed, you've got to turn it in. Well, some folks have a whacked sense of humor, and they will fill out the card Mickey Mouse,
right.
or
and then you have to turn that in.
And then you have to turn that in.
And then they say, see, voter fraud, Mickey Mouse.
Exactly, exactly.
So, but all the news is not bad. There's resistance to this voter suppression.
Absolutely.
We've only got a couple minutes left, but please talk about that a little bit.
Okay, and one of the things, I think the highlight of looking at this resistance and the way it works is Alabama, in that Doug Jones-Roy Moore special election in December 2017. And here you have, I mean, just stark differences. But civil society went in there, civil society, NAACP, League of Women Voters, ACLU, LDF, went in there and began to organize. They looked at all of the voter suppression methods that Alabama had deployed against the Black Belt counties. And Alabama had deployed every last one of them. Every last one of them. And these groups, so for felony disfranchisement, they sat there and they figured out how to move around it. They finally got Alabama to define what a moral turpitude clause was for a felony disfranchisement. Right. And then when Alabama refused to let people know that they were actually eligible to vote, these groups did that work.
Wow.
They knocked on doors. They drove people to and from the polls. They had poll watchers, attorneys at the polling stations to make sure that all of the laws were being adhered to and people were not being disfranchised. They moved those stumbling blocks out of the way. And what that meant was that whereas the state overall voter turnout rate was 40%, in the Black Belt counties, it was over 45%.
How about that?
Yes.
That is really excellent.
Yes.
We've run out of time, much to my chagrin. Carol Anderson, thank you so much. The book is One Person, No Vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. September 11, 2001 was more than 17 years ago. Why are we still in Afghanistan? Babies born the year of those terrible attacks are now applying to college. Few Americans even give Afghanistan much thought anymore. So how do we explain the recent death of Sergeant Major Timothy Bolliard? He was killed on a base near Kabul by two Afghan police officers who opened fire on him with a rifle and a machine gun. What was the point of his death? No American could give you a coherent answer. Sergeant Major Bolliard was 42 years old and was sent into combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan 7 times. That doesn't make any sense either. The reason he was put in harm's way so many times was because most Americans, while quick to praise our men and women in uniform, are utterly unwilling to put on a uniform and head off to combat themselves or to allow their children to fight. In one of the many cowardly motifs of our times, wars are meant to be fought by other people's children. Virtually every American is in favor of a strong defense, but with so few Americans willing to fight for their country, the tiny percentage who are willing are often sent into the war zones again and again and again, sometimes serving 8, 9, 10, or more tours. Being sent into combat that often is essentially a form of Russian roulette. Something bad is going to happen sooner or later. That we allow this affront to any semblance of courage or honor or fairness to continue is a tragic disgrace. The Pledge of Allegiance, the Star-Spangled Banner, God Bless America, they all ring hollow when coming from people whose only act of patriotism is removing their caps at a baseball game. That's all for now. See you next time.